So first off, I just want to say I am not using AI to write or help write my novel. You may have seen this news article recently, which reported that a sci-fi fantasy magazine was getting overwhelmed with submissions that were written by AI. I think we can all agree that that's pretty despicable. That's taking the place or pushing out real writers who deserve recognition for the hard work that they put in. And writing is a craft that I think should be respected. That's just like really uncool. But I do think that AI can be a really useful tool. So today I just want to have a kind of meandering chat about my idea development phase and research and my process for going about that, how I've used AI to help with that process, and also kind of my writing goals and timeline for the rest of the year. That's my plan for this video. Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. Have I ever written a book before? There's a long, complicated answer to this question, but the short, simple answer is no. Not really. So what's different about it this time around is that at the end of June, I am quitting my job and my husband and I are taking a gap year and we're going to travel around the country in our van. So while I am fun employed, I am planning to finally write a novel from start to finish and have a completed manuscript to show for it by the time I'm ready to settle back down in the real world. I am not changing this into an AuthorTube channel or anything like that, but I did think it would be really fun to kind of document this process for me to look back on in the future. So most of my content will still focus around books, but I do plan to provide some writing updates probably every couple of months. So right now I am in the idea development and research phase. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that process and where I am. I would say this idea really kicked off when I read Circe by Madeline Miller in November. If you're not familiar, Circe is like a Greek mythological figure, and Circe the book is a feminist retelling of her story. And it was super duper cool. It was really beautifully written and ended up being one of my favorite books of last year. I have loved mythology since I was in 6th grade when it was first introduced to me in school. And unrelated to that, I ran a Dungeons and Dragons one-shot for my family about a year ago. As I was reading Circe, these two unrelated ideas kind of collided in my mind. And I was like, I could combine kind of this cool feminist mythological origin story with alternate history and some traditional modern fantasy elements as well. That's kind of the idea. So I just started throwing all of my random thoughts into a Google Doc. And this is where the first piece of AI came into play. I use Midjourney Bot. If you're not familiar, Midjourney Bot is basically an AI art generation service. I started using it to create images of my characters and settings and just kind of concepts for my story. This really helps me kind of envision my world and make it feel real before I've ever even started writing. So, 3 or 5 years ago, I might have just used like a Pinterest board and made like a board that was called like book inspiration, but it would have just been a bunch of random images that I found on Google. Versus with Midjourney Bot, I can actually create images that are pretty close to what I'm picturing in my head. So that's pretty sweet. Would I have ever hired a real artist to do this sort of thing? No, of course not. My ideas are like half baked right now. There's no way that my ideas are developed enough to benefit from a real artist taking them and creating art. But the idea that I can do this on my own time to kind of help my idea generation is really, really cool. I don't really want to reveal too much about my book at this point, so I'll give a different example of my use of Midjourney Bot. In one of my current D&D campaigns, I am playing a character named Meridian, who is a water genasi storm sorcerer. For those of you who don't play D&D, she's basically like a genie that has special water and weather control powers. In my past D&D campaigns, I have just created my little minifigure in Hero Forge, which is a great website, and then sent the file to my husband, and he uses our 3D printer to print the mini, and then I painted it. This is my game piece of Meridian that I made. So she's pretty cool. I love her a lot. Now, this is as far as I've gone with most of my other D&D campaigns that I've been a part of. I have never been interested in hiring someone to create art of my D&D character just because like they could be killed at any time. But with Midjourney Bot, I was really inspired. You know, my Minnie's cool, but she's not like doing something really badass. And I really wanted to show my fellow players and my DM like, oh, but this is what I'm picturing. Like when we're in the middle of battle, like this is how she looks. So here is an image that I made with Midjourney Bot just to share with my fellow players. So you can imagine when I'm doing this for potential characters and places and things like that for my book, it's just really helpful and inspiring to be able to use that as part of my process. So where would this be tricky? Obviously, if I was trying to replace art that I would actually hire an artist for with AI generated art, that becomes very problematic. For instance, if I was to use AI generated art to create my book cover when I get to that point down the road. If you follow Bookish News, you may have seen this news story where Tor actually did use AI generated art for Christopher Paolini's most recent book, which is pretty abhorrent because they basically just stole the livelihood of an artist and gave it to a computer. So I hate that, especially just because Tor is like a multi-million-dollar publishing company. They already have established relationships with tons of great artists. Tor got a lot of flack for this, and I think they have since said that they will not be doing that for any future book covers. I do want to add the caveat that Christopher Paolini had nothing to do with that. Authors that go the traditional publishing route often have very little control over what their book cover looks like or who is the artist that does it. But where I think that AI-generated art could be helpful for book covers in the future is if, say, I went like the self-publishing route instead of the traditional publishing route, I could create some art using Midjourney Bot and hand it off to the artist that I hire and be like, hey, this is kind of what I was picturing in my head. Like, take this idea and just run with it. And I think that could be really helpful for self-published authors like me who have no significant artistic abilities. So the second piece of AI that I have used during this idea development phase of my book is ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is a large language model chatbot. And this has been really helpful because I'm writing basically like a historical fantasy or like an alternate history fantasy. That means that I'm not really doing so much world building as I am world discovering. I'm trying to base it in a historical time and place with actual events that were known to have happened. And so that just means I have a lot of learning to do. So the time period that I chose for my novel is kind of broadly described as the fall of Rome. Of course, the fall of Rome was like an 1100-year period or something like that. And so people living during that time didn't think they were living during the fall of the empire. They were just living in the empire. Specifically, I'm looking at the Byzantine Empire, which was like after the Roman Empire kind of split. It's complicated. I'm also specifically looking at the very early Byzantine Empire, which is like the first couple of centuries BCE. And the reason that this time period I think is the perfect time period for my fantasy novel is because this was really like the rise of Christianity and when people still very much believed a lot of really random pagan beliefs. And so I think this kind of power struggle and conflict that this could create within the story of Christianity is still in this early time kind of considered like this weird cult, and it definitely wasn't the mainstream thing, but they very quickly rise to power and start to push out and kind of demonize these pagan beliefs that have been the norm for centuries. So I just think that that could be like a really rad setting for a fantasy novel. So I will do a little screen record here just to show how I have been using ChatGPT in case you're not familiar with it. So this is what ChatGPT looks like. I could ask it something like, what was the role of women in the early Byzantine Empire? So you can see how this would be super helpful. In addition, I'm obviously doing Google searches and using other resources as well, but ChatGPT has been super duper helpful for me in this research phase. And I even asked it, at one point we were deep in the discussion, and I asked it what books it recommended for me to learn more about these topics. And it gave me a pretty significant list of books, and they weren't the same books that I found when I was doing a Google search on my own. And so then, of course, I looked up the books books that ChatGPT recommended, and I ended up buying several of them because they sounded really useful. Just as an example, this is one of the textbooks. They were mostly nonfiction, but there were a couple of textbooks that it recommended. So this is one of them that I bought, The World of Late Antiquity by Peter Brown, and it has been really, really useful. I've underlined the shit out of it in the parts that I've read so far, and it's giving me a lot of grounding in what this world was like. But, this is a history textbook, and so the unfortunate thing about this time period is that we really only have record of what was worth writing down and what archaeologists have discovered. So that doesn't really tell us a lot about what it was like for common people to live during that time. And so being able to use ChatGPT to kind of learn more than just like what's available in textbooks or a couple of random other books and research that I found has just been really, really great resource. So those are the two AI that I have used to help me during this idea development phase for my novel, and I highly recommend both of them. They've been great. My Google Doc got way too messy and long to make any sense or be readable whatsoever, and so I switched over to Scrivener. Scrivener is a software for writers to help organize our ideas, and so I've made lots of folders for different characters and plot elements and, all that kind of setting and good stuff. So I'm really excited about that. I've used Scrivener in the past for some of my other writing projects and really, really love it. And then earlier this month, there were two writing conferences that I attended. They both happened to be within the same week. One of them was called the Women in Publishing Summit, and the other one was called the Pro Writing Aid Fantasy Writers Week. Pro Writing Aid is another writing software that I really love that helps you edit your writing, which I highly recommend. But anyway, one of the sessions that I attended was about how to write a query letter. So for those of you who don't know, a query letter is how you get an agent. If you are interested in being a traditionally published author and not a self-published author or an indie author, you have to have an agent. So a query letter is kind of the first step after you have a completed manuscript in order to start down that road. It's not just like a cover letter like you would do with a job application. It's like a very specific kind of document that needs to hit certain things that the agents are looking for. And so one of the things that is looked for in a query letter is the hook, which is like under 50 words. It highlights kind of the main conflict. It kind of creates intrigue and doesn't really reveal the ending of the book. So this might be like a tagline that you see on a movie poster, basically. And then additionally in the query letter, you provide a brief synopsis of your book, which is, generally like 4 to 10 sentences. Because I attended that session, I took a lot of notes and I tried to basically like write a query letter for this idea for my book that I have in mind, even though I'm nowhere near querying, and I'm sure it will change drastically between now and then. And that was a really helpful exercise for me to be able to just try and write a brief synopsis and what would be the hook to get people interested. That was part of my process during this kind of idea development phase, and being able to write it down like that actually did help me to solidify kind of what my idea was. So where I'm at right now is I'm just doing a bunch of research still. I'm reading a lot of textbooks and nonfiction books, which doesn't sound super exciting, but it is generating so many ideas for me. The more I learn about this world, the more I'm like, ooh, I can use that, or ooh, that's, I can incorporate that somehow. So that's cool. It's helping me develop not just the setting, but also like sometimes the setting kind of can define the story as well. I'm also continuing my deep dive into AuthorTube. I have a lot of AuthorTubers I could recommend, but one that I want to give a shout out to if you are interested in AuthorTube that I don't think you would find if you were looking for authors on YouTube is Matt Colville, because he is not an AuthorTuber. He is a dungeon master and he makes D&D related content. He has an entire playlist with over 100 videos called Running the Game, and it's about advice that he gives on how to run an engaging game. It's really just about like creating unique settings, creating complex characters, how to build tension, things like that, all the things that you want in a story. So I just really highly recommend Matt Colville and his Running the Game videos because I think they're helpful for writers. So my next steps in this phase of my process are I'm going to keep reading, keep researching, keep learning more. And then one thing I want to do, which was a piece of advice that I got from an AuthorTuber, was to take personality tests as if I were my character. Being able to read the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs results for who my characters are should help me have a fuller picture of not just who they are, but why they would make the decisions that they might make in the plot and help me develop their ideas for them throughout the story. So that's something that I want to do here pretty soon. And then I recently ordered a couple of more books, like Save the Cat Writes a Novel, if you've heard of that one, but books basically about how to write an outline, because I am definitely the type of person that needs to know where I'm going before I just start writing something down. So I will probably make another video about outlining once I get to that part of the process. I would say my lofty idealistic goal is to have my outline done by the end of April. That could be a little optimistic. My actual real deadline goal is hopefully to have my outline done by June 30th, because that is basically the start of the uprooting of my life. June 30th will be my last day at my job, and then me and my husband's lease ends on July 31st. So the month of July is going to be really crazy. We're going to be packing and making all our final trip preparations. Plus we have several different family events that we have to attend that month. I'm not really planning to work on my novel at all in July. If I do work on my novel in July, that'll be a perk, but I'm not going to hold myself to that because I have really no idea what to expect. Then in August, we hit the road. So my plan for the rest of the year from August on is I want to treat writing like at least a part-time job. I want to be writing at least 20 hours a week. My goal is going to be 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And of course, plenty of time for adventuring and reading and doing other things as well. Yeah, that's kind of my goal. And I definitely think if I'm writing 20 hours a week, that I can easily write a novel over the next year. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. But I just wanted to share how I've been doing my idea development, how I've used AI and some other technology to help me in that process. And I hope you guys will follow along and, maybe if I get this done, read my book someday. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you found this interesting or helpful in some way. And if you would like to see more of my writing journey, please be sure to subscribe if you found this helpful, like this video. As always, be kind, read books, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.